To you coming out on computer land. Good to see you. Joke, I can't see you. Glad you're here. Good to see all of you. And let's go to our Father in prayer before we begin our class today. Let us pray. Almighty God, we're so grateful for this opportunity, Father, to come before you now. And we're thankful that we have this place and that these people have decided to come here on their own. And that you provided us with this opportunity to go into your word. Please bless us as we do so. You are the great high King, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. There is no one like you. Please make me a worthy mouthpiece for you this morning and help us to push all of our worldly concerns and thoughts out of our heads for just the next few minutes so we can be filled with your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we are in Acts chapter 23. We're going to recap for just a few minutes because we're not that far into Acts 23. Can anybody remind me what's going on in Acts 23? Paul has been summoned. He's been summoned before whom? What's it say here in verse 1? What's that? What are you pointing at? Okay, well, I can't hear you, so you're going to have to speak up a little bit. Sorry. Did you say council? You said Sanhedrin? Okay. So yes, what is the Sanhedrin? How many of them are there? 71, I believe, right? 71. And what else? They are the ruling council. Remember, Judea was the area where the Jews called home, but the nation was the Jewish nation, okay? So they had their place in Jerusalem. They had their kings in the past. They had a Roman-appointed king in Herod now, which wasn't really true. They had false high priests, remember, that they were appointed by Rome, which weren't their real high priest. So their nation consists of a conglomerate of people who just are really proud to be Jews. Okay, and we're going to talk about the Jewish nation as we go through this chapter today. But it was ruled by a group of guys called the Sanhedrin. And they were, I don't know if they were elected or what, but they were probably the upper class. And the upper class were there, and there were 71 of them. And you also had another group. What was that group called? The older gentlemen. What were they called? Elders. Good. How many of them were there? I'm not sure. A lot of them. A lot of them had been Sanhedrin before and were just now kind of retired and doing the leadership thing with wisdom. So you have the council, you have the elders, and you also have a bunch of scribes who are doing what? Doing all the official recordings, and all this stuff is written on scrolls because there was no paper at the time. And then it's filed in some file someplace, and records are kept. And so this is what's happening. And Paul's before a bunch of men, over 100, and they're not happy with him. And so in verse 23, he's looking chapter 23, verse 1, he's looking intently at the council. What's he say? I have lived a what?
Life before God and all good conscience.
That's right. My life up to this day has been great. I have no bad conscience about anything that I've done. I'm in perfectly good conscience up to right now. What happened in verse 2 for him saying that? He got smacked. Why? What happened? Who smacked him? That's right. Ananias ordered one of the Jewish guards, because they had, their own interior guard, right? So he said, strike that man in the mouth. And they did. Throw him to the floor. Okay? So, yes, sounded just like this. Throw him to the floor. Of course, that's a Monty Python thing, so if you don't know what that is, then I'm sorry. No, not that one. It's Life of Brian.
Oh.
Yeah. Throw him to the floor. Again, sir? Yes. So Ananias said, strike him in the mouth. Why? Okay, so who's Ananias? Anybody say it real quick. What's the position he holds? High priest. Is he the real high priest? No. Remember when we talked about this last week, if you were here? Ananias was appointed by Herod in about AD 48. Who was the real high priest, if you remember kind of back in our teaching in this chapter? There's a guy named Annas. Remember him? Annas was actually the Jewish high priest. I'm going to write all this from memory, okay? So this is about AD 15, when the first or the fourth Roman emperor, or the fourth Roman procurator before Pontius Pilate came in, and he fired Annas, and he put in, I think, 4 more guys before he finally settled on a guy named Caiaphas. Okay? When they took Jesus to the high priest, when the Jewish people took Jesus to the high priest, who did they take him to? They took him to Annas, because they knew who the real high priest was by lineage. These guys who came after Annas were not high priests. They weren't related to Annas. I'm sorry, they weren't related to Annas. They were high priests, but they didn't do any good, and so they were all fired one by one until Caiaphas came along. And Caiaphas was the longest-serving high priest in the record. Okay? So who's the real high priest? Now, Caiaphas has passed on, and now we have this guy here. What's his name again? Ananias. Ananias.
Oh, Annas and Ananias. That's confusing.
It is. It is. Which is this is why I'm taking time to write all this stuff down. Annas had 5 sons. They were passed over for the high priest, and Caiaphas was put in. But Caiaphas is Annas' son-in-law. So you see how sticky things get. So do you think that blood was good here? My sons and I have been pushed out by the Roman government, and you've been appointed, but you're married to my daughter. Do you think things are going good at Christmas time, at Thanksgiving here? Okay. No, they're not. And there's a little history after this where Caiaphas may have actually, done something bad, like murdered his father-in-law, but I can't recall it right now, so strike it from the record. But Ananias is now the high priest. Is Ananias a popular high priest? Everybody do this. He's not a high priest. They don't like him. Nobody likes him because he's a thug. After all, what did he just have a soldier do? Well, no, he had this. Right, we read it today. Where he had someone strike Paul in the mouth for doing what? For just saying, "My conscience is clear." Hit him in the mouth. Smack. Now, did Paul take this lying down? No. What did he do? He fired back, right? What did he say? Look in verse 3. God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. It doesn't sound much like an insult to us. But God is going to strike you. For a Jew, that's not what you want. We don't want it either, but for a Jew particularly, because it's the Jewish God, the Jewish religion, the Jewish Sanhedrin, Jewish high priest, right? And you're a whitewashed wall. What does that mean? It means you're fake. It means you're fake. Remember when we talked about adobe last time? So it's just mud and straw baked in the sun to form a brick, but they don't leave it that way. What do? They whitewash it to protect it from the elements and to make it look pretty. But what's underneath there? Mud, straw. Yeah. So you're a whitewashed wall. It means you are not who you appear to be. Okay? So there is a bystander in verse 4 that said, "Oh, okay, you're going to talk that way to God's high priest?" Do you think that Paul knew who he was talking to? I mean, in his private common sense head, he's a Pharisee. He's in the Sanhedrin, right? The guy with the funny hat said, "Do this thing," right? Don't you think he knew that was the high priest? So Paul right now says, "Okay, sorry, wasn't aware." He's backpedaling a little bit, and he says, "I know it says you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." So he's gathering his thoughts. Now, this is my opinion. This is the way I'm looking at the scripture, but from experience, you'd be able to tell who the commanding officer was if you were in before the commanding officer, right? So what is his break glass in case of emergency moment, his thought here in verse 6? Huh?
Divide the people.
Divide the people. How did he do it? All right. Explain to me what the Pharisees were. Someone, anyone.
Very adept in the law.
Adept in the law. Right. Good. Meaning they were very... Sorry, Dana? What is it?
They believed in resurrection.
They believed in the resurrection. They were very strict. They're big Torah followers. And the Sadducees were what? They were sad, you see. Why? They didn't believe in the resurrection. Also, the Sadducees were the upper class. These were the really rich guys, yeah. Pharisees were very legalistic and strict, but the Sadducees were the more educated, more liberal, richer, more wealthy people. At least that's what my research has taught me. Okay? So, Paul immediately says, okay, there's an out here. And he says it in verse 6, Brethren, I am a Pharisee, son of Pharisees, and I am on trial here for the hope and resurrection of the dead. So he just pulled that pin and threw that grenade in there, right? And then it exploded, boom. And then what happened? It worked. As he said this, verse 7, there occurred a dissension between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Why was it divided? We've already talked about it, but let's look in verse 8. The Sadducees say there is no what? Resurrection. Nor an angel, nor a spirit. Okay, they're kind of in the Texas tradition. We don't believe in anything supernatural. Once you die, you die. You're dead. But then the Pharisees acknowledge all of them. Okay? Verse 9, there occurred a great uproar. That was very easy. Very easy. Some of the scribes of the Pharisaic party stood up and began to argue heatedly, saying, Whoa, we find nothing wrong with this man. Suppose a spirit or an angel has spoken to him. So immediately, who's supporting him? The Pharisees. When he said, I am a Pharisee, I'm just like you. I'm not like this side of the room. I'm the Pharisee. Have you ever watched a State of the Union address with the president? When they show the audience, if he's speaking conservative things, who's clapping? All the Republicans. Who's not? All the Democrats. When he's saying liberal things, who's clapping? Democrats. Who's not? Republicans. So think of this. Pharisees, Sadducees. I'm a Pharisee. This side of the room stands up and begins to support. This side of the room stands up and begins to defame. Okay? So, we find nothing wrong. Hey, suppose a spirit has told him these things. Suppose an angel has talked to him. Who are we to stand in his way? We should let him go. Look in verse 10. And a great dissension was developing. As it was, the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them, and ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. Where is the barracks? That's right. What's it called? Oh, battalion. Yes, battalion is a cohort. That's great. Good job. But what was the Roman fortress called? Fortress Antonia. Going to Fort Antony. Okay? Because it's named after Mark Antony. Not that one. He's the guy I think was married to Cleopatra. Mark Antony, Fortress Antonia. This was the 10th Legion's, I believe it's the 10th Legion's headquarters in Jerusalem. Okay? Were there, how many of them were there in that footprint there, in the 40-acre footprint? How many people were there as trigger pullers and support staff? Remember when I told you this? About 6,000. Okay? So the Temple Mount, archaeology is showing the way right now that the Temple Mount is not the Temple Mount. It's not the foundation of Herod's temple. It's actually the footprint for the fortress. And then, of course, as Jesus said, the entire temple and everything, Mount Zion, is completely taken down. Not a stone shall be left. Okay? And so now they're finding evidence. I told you about that hill where they found those ring impressions. They're doing all that stuff there. If you want to find out more about it, look on the internet, City of David archaeological site. That's what it is. Very fascinating. Okay. So they took him into Fortress Antonia and closed the door. Okay. Let me see, where was I? Verse 11. But on the night immediately following, the Lord stood at his side and said, Take courage, For as you have solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem, so you must witness where? At Rome. Why is this significant? Oh, yeah, that's a good answer. The Jews were kicked out of Rome. Why?
Bring in trouble.
That's right. Exactly right. So, who else is at Rome? The emperor. And the Roman Empire was the conquering force of the day. Any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Verse 12. So the next morning when it was day, hello Linda, how are you? Good to see you. Gentlemen, lady, how are you? Good, thank you. When it was day, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves under an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. All right. What's going on here? Remember, we have had, even though the Jewish religion originated with the Jews, from which the Christian religion sprang, and Jesus was a Jew, and all the apostles were Jews, and the church in Jerusalem was in a Jewish place filled with Jewish Christians, okay? We still have a bunch of Jews who don't want anything good to happen with Christianity. Who are these people? It starts with an H. The Hellenistic Jews. Remember, they are people from outside of Jerusalem who have come to Jerusalem and now feel very enthused when they get there. When it was day, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves under an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. How many of them were there? Look in verse 13. More than 40. Why is the letter or the number 40 used to describe this? Well, yeah. What does 40 mean? A tribulation. A trial. Yeah, that's right. A tribulation. 40. Does it have to be exactly 40? Actually, it says more than 40, right? More than 40. Why didn't it say around 45? It specifically used the number 40. It's a signal. Okay, it's a time of tribulation. So they came to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a solemn oath to taste nothing until we have killed Paul. Now therefore you and the council notify the commander to bring him down to you." What commander are they talking about? We've already been talking about a commander, the commander who did what? Came down out of Fortress Antonia, rescued Paul, took him to the barracks. Which commander are we talking about? That same guy? Yes. We're talking about the Roman commander. Notify the commander of the garrison, have him bring him down to you as though you're going to determine his case by a more thorough investigation, and when you do, we'll kill him. For our part, he says, we are ready to slay him before he comes near the place. So that's their plan. They've enlisted the high priest and the council. These guys show up as a band of vigilantes, 40 or so of them, who have taken an oath and said, we're not going to eat or drink anything until that guy's laying on the ground with no blood in him. And we know how to do it. We'll go to the Sanhedrin and ask them to just simply bring him down. When he comes down, we'll kill him. But that little plan went awry in verse 16. Who heard about this?
Paul's sister, or the son of Paul's sister.
Yeah, Paul's nephew. Paul's nephew heard of the ambush, and he came to the fort. And that took some, I would imagine, some backbone. He came to the fort and told Paul, and Paul told one of the centurions, lead this young man to the commander, for he has something to report. What's a centurion? Commander of 100. Commander of 100. Century. Okay? Commander of 100. He took him and led him to the commander and said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to lead this young man to you since he has something to tell you. And the commander took him by the hand and stepping aside began to inquire of him privately, what is it that you have to report to me? What kind of personality are we seeing that this commander has? This is a very reasonable guy. After all, what did he do? He brought 2 centurions and their troops, 200 troops, when there was an unrest happening in the city. He separated Paul. He bound Paul, but he separated him. He tried to make sense of what was going on. He couldn't make sense of what was going on. He brought him to the steps. He allowed Paul to speak. Then it got worse. So now he's taking them in to the barracks. What was he going to do to Paul in order to get information from him? He was going to scourge him, right? And they had probably stripped him, and they had him stretched out with thongs. Somebody was pulling his arms out, and they were going to scourge him. What did Paul say? Is this lawful to someone who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned? And that report went to the same commander. The commander made an inquiry and let him go. And what's the Bible say? That he was afraid. The commander had a conscience. The commander was worried. The commander had a career. The commander probably had a family, and he didn't want that stuff to go down the tube. Now they brought Paul into the barracks, and this young kid comes up, says he's Paul's nephew. Some soldier brings him to the commander, and the commander doesn't say, "Get out of my office." He says, "Come here, let's talk." He took him aside privately and says, "What is it you've got to tell me?" Sounds like a pretty good guy. Not perfect. Yeah, open door policy. Yeah. He's not perfect. He is acting as a man of his time, in a position of his time, of great authority, and he has concerns. But he seems to be a very decent person. So he says in verse 20, the report to the commander is, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down tomorrow to the council, as though they are going to inquire somewhat more thoroughly about him. Do not listen to them, for more than 40 of them are lying in wait for him, who have bound themselves under a curse, not to eat or drink until they slay him, and now they are ready and waiting for the promise from you." So the commander let the young man go, instructing him, "Tell no one that you have notified me of these things." All right. Any questions? Yes?
Not a question, but there's more than 40, and I understand it stands for like trial, but is it 41 or 3,000?
Yeah, there's just more than 40. That's right. Yeah. Not 39. No.
Not 40?
Yeah.
More than 40.
Yeah. More than 40. More than 40. "And thou shalt lob it towards thine enemies, who shall snuff it." Okay. Yep, I agree. So there's some kind of message here that the Jewish writers knew what was going on. Can you imagine a gaggle, trying to lead a gaggle of 40 plus vigilantes? Can you? Hey, come here, go over there and wait. I'm not waiting. Okay, we're going to meet over here. No, we're going to meet over here. Try that, you know. It'd be like, there used to be this comedy group way back in the way early silent film era called the Keystone Cops. Have you ever seen any Keystone Cops? They're just a bunch of guys in these police uniforms that are running around with their batons. They wind up hitting each other and, you know, all kinds of stuff. That's the kind of idea that I get when I hear about these 40 plus assassins. Okay. So in verse 23, he, the commander of the Roman garrison, called to him two of the centurions and said, "Here's what I need you to do. Get your men ready." How many men do centurions lead? 100. So he called two centurions. What did he say? "Get your men ready. Get 200 soldiers ready by the third hour of the night to proceed to Caesarea with how many horsemen?" Why are horsemen important? Think about this. Fighting battles at the time, what did you have? You have foot soldiers and cavalry. What else did you have? You didn't have any air support. You didn't have artillery. Yes, you did. Yep. I don't know whether or not these foot soldiers had any. It doesn't say if they had any bows and arrows with them. Huh? Yep. It says right here, 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. I just hadn't gotten that far. Good thinking. Good thinking. You'd be a good tactician. But if you're fighting a force, or you want to really make a difference on the battlefield during that time, you really need horses. You really do. Did you realize that horses were used in the battlefield all the way through World War II. And that in World War I, there were a lot of horses on the battlefield. Have you ever seen the length of the bayonet they issued with the World War I rifles in before? 17 inches long. 17 inches. How long of a blade do you need to reach the heart of a man? About 6 inches. Why you need a 17-inch blade? In case you had to stick it in a horse. Think about that. Well, I mean, horses are warriors. They have warrior spirits. And so if you have a cavalry charge coming towards you, you need to make a pike, which means you put bayonets and you put it on the ground like so, and the horse is not going to run up on your pike because they're smart. So think about this. What's that? Germans used a lot of horses. Well, pulling wagons for ammo and chow and things like that, particularly on the Eastern Front, because their tanks way far ahead of their supply lines, and gas and oil and things like that.
In the Marine Corps.
Yeah, but not.
They do like mountain training.
Yeah, that's right. Mules. Yeah, mules. That's right. Yeah. Okay. So get 200 soldiers ready. There's 200 people by the third hour of the night to go to Caesarea. Where's Caesarea?
That's the city on the coast.
It's on the coast. Who's at Caesarea?
Covering body.
That's right. Pontius Pilate, the procurators, all of them were at Caesarea. They did not stay in Jerusalem. Why? It's an armpit. That's why. Yeah, Pilate, well, whoever the Roman governor was in Caesarea. They did not stay in Jerusalem. So Pilate would travel to Jerusalem with a group of soldiers to supplement the force in Jerusalem during Passover and Pentecost and things like that. So he could be there to make judgments and things like that. But as soon as it was done, back to Caesarea. Okay. So they're going to Caesarea with 200 foot soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. That's a lot of guys. They are also to provide mounts to put Paul on and bring him safely to Felix, who's the governor. We're going to learn about him. And he wrote a letter having this form. Now, this is the Roman commander's report. It's very fascinating. What's his name? Claudius Lysias. Claudius Lysias. This is me. To the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This is in verse 26, going into 27. When this man was arrested by the Jews and was about to be slain by them, I came to them with the troops and rescued him, learning that he was a Roman. Verse 28. And wanting to ascertain the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council, and I found him to be accused over questions about their law, but under no accusation deserving death or imprisonment. Verse 30. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, also instructing his accusers to bring charges against him before you. Okay. So he's sending him up the chain. Is this a pretty cool view into what's going on here? The Roman commanders from Fortress Antonia, the commanders report to Felix the governor, saying, this is what happened, and I'm passing this along to you for the safety of all concerned. Right?
I was just thinking it's like when you have duty and you have that checklist, when you pass it up.
Yeah.
That's that threshold.
Yeah, the commander's wake-up call. They still have that? Yeah, see.
I don't know. It's
Yeah, what it is. Yeah, CC something, yeah. So he says, I'm bringing him up. Now, there's some things that are left out of this, notably. Okay? So he says in verse 27, when this man was arrested by the Jews and was about to be slain by them, I came up to them with troops and rescued him. Then what did I leave out? Yeah, I was going to, I didn't even ask about his identity. I assumed that he was an Egyptian guy. And we kind of took him into the barracks and stripped him and stretched him out, and we're just about to flay him. But he happened to open his mouth, and but it's okay because we didn't do anything to him, didn't mention any of that thing. And wanting to ascertain the charge, blah, blah, blah. So that's a pretty interesting thing. Leaving information out. You're not lying. You're just not reporting the entire thing. And did you really need to? No, you didn't need to say that stuff. So that's how he skated out of that. It's not bad. Okay, any questions or comments about that?
I think he did kind of lie because he said, I rescued him because I learned that he was
Let me see.
They took him away.
And rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. Yeah. Having learned that he was a Roman. A Roman! Having learned he was a Roman. So I guess it depends on your translation of the letter. And if no one asked the question, how did you learn that he was a Roman? Then you're safe. He told me he was a Roman. Yeah, he did. Right. Verse 31. Anything else? Isn't this fascinating? It's fascinating to me. Is it fascinating to you? I hope that you're enjoying this because maybe I'm just a real dweeb, but I love this stuff. I think this is awesome. Verse 31. So the soldiers, in accordance with their orders, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. Antipatris. Antipatris was a Roman garrison halfway between Jerusalem and Caesarea. So it's not like they went in one trip. They had to make a stop. So then that day after that, the next day in verse 32, leaving the horsemen to go on with them, they returned to the barracks. So the foot soldiers and the spearmen went back to the barracks, and the horsemen went on to protect Paul. How many horsemen were there? Look in verse 23. 70. 70 horsemen. Pretty intimidating. When these had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when they had read it, he asked from what province he was, and he learned that he was from where? Cilicia. Where is Cilicia? Remember your map? Where is Cilicia? Beg your pardon? That's where Tarsus is. Where is it? Yes, it's in modern-day Turkey. Let me draw you a very rudimentary map once more. Just to know where. Yeah, I just want you. Yeah. So here's where Judea is. And Cilicia, this is Cilicia here, and Tarsus is right there. Just so you have a general idea of where they are. Okay. And Caesarea is somewhere right around here. So they're not too far away. Now remember all this. This is where the Hellenized Jews are from. Was Paul a Hellenized Jew? Yes, he was. Okay. Was he fanatical about his religious beliefs? Absolutely. Okay. So we have this happening, and we need to learn about who Felix is coming up. I don't know if you noticed, but I posted a paper on Felix. Did anyone read it? Did you read it?
I did.
Is it interesting? Listen, a little aside here. All this information that I'm getting and bringing to you, it's all on the internet. It's not like I knew all this before we started this class. I'm just doing research. I'm just Googling stuff and pulling information off, writing some of it, rewriting some of it, leaving information out, bringing relevant stuff, putting it in, and you can do the exact same thing. Okay? And the little paper that I put on the message board was just the Wikipedia page for Felix. It's fascinating business. These people had some lives, and they were involved in their lives, and they were self-serving, most of them, and they were crooked, most of them, and they were politically connected, and this guy was too, and they were, it's a fascinating look at humanity when you can look at these people and get a report about them. So instead of just reading over things like Antipatris and Felix and Cilicia and Caesarea and Antonia, man, know these things. Because sooner or later, particularly for the gentlemen here, you're going to be teaching this stuff to people who want to be interested in what you're teaching. If you're just reading from the Bible, most of them are not going to be so interested. You need this kind of intensity, okay? Which is why you're here, which is why you keep coming, I think. So let's just keep that in your head. All right. Verse 34, when he'd read it, this is Felix, when he'd read the report, he asked what province Paul was from. He learned he was from Cilicia, and he said, all right, I'll give you a hearing after your accusers arrive also, giving orders for him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. What's a praetorium?
The governor's official residence.
Herod.
He's going to stay at the governor's house.
Yeah. Praetorium. Praetorium is basically, it's going to be the barracks for the emperor's guard. The emperor's guard were known as praetorians. I think they had maybe, I don't know for sure, but their color's a little different. I think they had a purple cape instead of a red cape or whatever. But they were special hand-selected guys, bodyguard for the emperor. So if he's staying in the praetorium, he's probably staying in, like the Marsoc barracks or whatever. Yeah. So, because he's still under guard. So he's not going to be in the emperor's house. He'll be in the emperor's barracks, where they can keep him in a duty room with the logbook and all that kind of stuff. It's the same.
Maybe they gave him a nice room.
Huh?
Maybe they gave him a nice room.
They may have. They may have. They did treat him well. After, as you're going to see in chapter 24, he was basically free, but couldn't leave. Treated well, could receive visitors and things like that. So they put him in Herod's praetorium, which wasn't all that bad. And now we're in chapter 24. And we still have a few moments. Would you like to keep going? Good, because I would too. Look in verse 1. After how many days? All right, here comes Darth Vader. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down. What does it mean, came down? Jerusalem. Every time you see come down in the Bible, you're going to be thinking now, Jerusalem is in an elevated position about 1,500 feet higher. You have to come down, even though you're going north to Caesarea. It's northwest. Like going to Oregon. You're northwest.
Oh.
So, go, yeah. Oh, that's fine. I'm glad you're asking questions because it helps me reiterate the stuff in my own head too. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down. This is the same guy we wrote up here earlier, not the real high priest. He's a thug. He'll have you struck, okay, from Jerusalem to Caesarea with some what? What's the word? Elders, good. This is not the Sanhedrin. This is the older, wiser gentleman. So who is on the side of Ananias? That's what's signaling to us. Ananias has at least some of the elders on his side. So when Ananias wants to do something, he has backing. All right? And they also had an attorney. Uh-oh, I wish that Luke was here today. An attorney named Tertullus. Tertullus. Now this is a Latin name. Tertullus is a Latin name. So we have the Jewish high priest Ananias coming with some elders and a hired gun, an attorney named Tertullus, or I don't know how you say it. Tertullus. He probably had a hard shell about him and he stuck his neck out. Tertullus? Yeah. So a lot of people will generally assume that Tertullus was a Hellenistic Jew, and he may have been. He also may have been a hired Gentile lawyer, because you can hire a lawyer just like you can hire a lawyer today. What lawyer do you want? The best one. If you're the chief of the Sanhedrin, you got plenty of money. Hire the best lawyer. Happens to be a Latin-speaking guy. Is that going to make a difference? Well, we're going to Caesarea. What do they speak in Caesarea in the Roman court? Or Latin, Greek or Latin. So it's a mystery, who Tertullus was and whether he was Gentile or Jew or Hellenistic Jew, a Latin speaker or a Greek speaker or both. He's a talker. Okay, he's a good orator. Okay. You know, I suppose we should look up the Greek word for attorney and see if it could also cross over to just be orator. But they brought him down to present their case. Yes, he's a persuader. He's a car salesman. Look in verse 2. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, what's the governor's name? Starts with an F. Felix. All right. Tertullus is the lawyer, and he began to say to the governor, whose name was Felix, look at what he says in verse 2, beginning verse 2. This is boilerplate human language when you're trying to convince someone. Think about this. Excuse me, sir. Good to see you. Glad to be here. Blessings upon this house, etc., blah, blah, blah. That's not written. That's me. Here we go in verse 2. Since we have through you attained much peace, because you're such a great governor, and since by your providence reforms are carried out for this nation, what nation is he talking about? The Jewish nation. We acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness. So thank you very much. Yeah. But, in verse 4, so I don't weary you any further, let's cut to the chase. I beg you to grant us, by your kindness, just a brief hearing, for we have found this man here a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, verse 6. And he even tried to desecrate the temple. Imagine that. And then we arrested him, did they? The Roman soldiers arrested him. We wanted to judge him according to our own law, but Lysias, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accusers to come before you. We could have handled it ourselves. By examining yourself concerning all these matters, well, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him. Imagine that. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like it would be something that someone would say today? We're going to go ahead. Say it again.
It wasn't their fault. We did what we were.
Yes. And all this interference from the military. Military came down and just took them away from us. We were going to handle it ourselves. And look at all this trouble we have to cause you now because of this commander. I mean, I had to travel all this way. Think of the expense. All those men, all those horses, a night at Antipatris.
Question. The Romans were fully